Welcome to another episode of Full Build Friday, where I try to build a character from a comic, game, or similar source using the baseline rules of Pathfinder Second Edition. These characters are built on Path Builder 2e. When it comes to building characters from comic books, I've often found it easier to build villains rather than heroes. Villains have flaws as part of their nature. They have gaps in which they are lacking for the hero to exploit and emerge victorious, whereas heroes often have less exploitable or obvious flaws. Take for example Batman. Obviously, he has a high strength, but he also needs a high dex with how he dodges enemies, a high constitution to survive what he has, a high intelligence because he's the world's greatest detective. He also needs a high wisdom for his indomitable will, and a high charisma for his abilities in intimidation and deceit. It's hard to justify low ability scores on such a character, or figure out which ability scores to focus. But villains will often be lacking in one or two areas, which is why this week's build portrays one of my favorite Batman villains, Mr. Freeze.
Freeze will do.
Before we get into the actual build, we must discuss some build goals for him. To be entirely fair, as a comic book character, Freeze has had a couple different iterations with different backstories to parse through. For the sake of simplification, I'm going for a kind of middle ground, while probably taking the most inspiration from his animated and Arkhamverse versions. As a child, Victor Freeze would kidnap the ailing pets of neighbors and freeze them in hopes of saving them, which disturbed his parents. In response to this, they shipped him off to boarding school and then quietly disowned him, leaving the young boy alone in the world. He dedicated himself to his studies, particularly cryogenics, but demonstrated an aptitude in a number of sciences. His solitude finally found an end upon meeting a dancer named Nora in college, who he fell in love with and eventually married. When she took terminally ill, he took a better paying job at a drug company, where he could also work on a way to cryogenically preserve his beloved wife until he could figure out a way to save her. However, his employer tried to shut the project down, resorting to force when Victor refused. In the ensuing struggle, Victor was plunged into the coolness he had developed, but miraculously survived, though his physiology was altered by the incident. Victor could now only survive in frigid environments, even a spring day being too hot for his body to handle. Using his engineering capabilities, he created a highly advanced and bulky cryosuit that could keep his body temperatures below freezing while also serving to protect him from physical harm. Still driven by his desire to save his wife and take some vengeance on those who had wronged him, he also built an ice gun that could freeze victims in ice, generate gusts of frosty wind, and create simple structures such as ice walls and pillars. His transformation also made him extremely resistant to toxins and diseases, while some versions are so cold that merely touching him can be dangerous. Finally, as the villainous Mr. Freeze, he has demonstrated an ability to adapt to the tactics of his foes, deploying gadgets and plots to counter previous methods used to defeat him. With that done, let's get into Freeze's ABCs: Ancestry, Background, and Class. I stuck with Human as the base ancestry. I don't think there was any other that really stood out, so I defaulted to his actual ancestry. However, I did use the Undying Universal Heritage with the Rhyme Soul lineage in an attempt to represent his transformation. It doesn't come with a weakness to fire or hot environments, which seems mainly to be the purview of the Poppet, but it does protect him from chilly weather. Partially raised by a boarding school and eventually going into teaching, I settled on a setting-agnostic version of the Ustalavic academic background, which felt more appropriate with its crafting skill over the magic skills of the Magambian academic. This also makes him trained in academia lore and gives him the skill training feat, which we'll use to become trained in nature for mechanical purposes. Finally, with his invention of the cryosuit, his ice gun, and a number of other tools, I decided to represent Mr. Freeze with the Inventor class. Since he has two major inventions he's associated with, I could see going either armor innovation or weapon innovation. But since the cryosuit is somewhat more essential to the character, I went for the armor. I will try to give a shout out to weapon innovation options, but in general this build is focused on the armor innovation and wading into melee. Given the bulk of his suit, I picked the Power Suit Armor, with the Flagenhausen, the Flumptity, the Flibberty Gibbet, the Phlogistonic Regulator modification to protect himself from heat and cold alike. For a weapon innovation, I take a Jezzail, since the number of hands needed to wield his ice gun seems to vary by source, with the modular head modification to allow him to switch between piercing icicles, slashing gusts, or bludgeoning chunks. And also because there aren't many options for ranged weapon innovations. For his class feat, he takes variable core for cold damage so that he can explode in a corona of cryo cataclysm. He also gains the inventor's skill feat. Normally, He would be trained in crafting from his class, but he already got that from his background, so he will start out trained in acrobatics, arcana, athletics, intimidation, medicine, occultism, society, and survival. As an inventor, Mr. Freeze will prioritize his intelligence, followed by his primary attack stat, which will be strength for this particular build. For skills, his crafting will increase automatically, so he'll focus on medicine to treat his wife, nature for some more mechanical purposes, and then eventually intimidation, because Mr. Freeze has become a man who often gets his way through the threats of violence and menacing others, when he isn't turning to outright violence. Starting at second level, Mr. Freeze picks up an archetype. In my original version of this build, I liked the Gelid Shard archetype, but after giving it some thought, I like the Witch Dedication better since it is intelligence-based and he can still pick up a Winter Patron. This grants him a trained skill, I pick Thievery, a familiar, which I would flavor as a spiritual remnant of his wife, or something using that shape, and some cantrips. The only cantrip that really matters here is Ray of Frost, which we can use to represent his ice gun even with our armor innovation. With his work at a drug company while also searching for a cure for his wife, he'll also grab alchemical crafting for his skill feat. This build does have Mr. Freeze kind of being in the thick of things, to which end he'll take toughness as his third level general feat. As an inventor, his crafting automatically increases to expert, while he will choose to increase medicine to expert as well. At 4th level, Freeze takes basic witch spellcasting to gain more potent spells, predominantly looking for cold options. From among first rank spells, Chilling Spray and Snowball stand out. With his increased crafting, he can also take magical crafting as his skill feat. I was hoping for some more ice-based feats from his ancestry, but none make themselves apparent by 5th level, so he'll take Haughty Obstinacy to reflect his refusal to compromise in the mission to heal his wife. He can also increase nature to expert, though this is mainly again for those aforementioned mechanical purposes. He needs those proficiencies for his witch spellcasting feats. On the topic of his witch class, he picks up basic witchcraft with 6th level to gain a basic lesson of the elements. The most important part of this is granting him the Elemental Betrayal focus spell, which he can use to make enemies susceptible to cold damage. And while making enemies weak to cold, he can also use Elemental Zone gained at this level to enhance his cold damage or slow enemies with Rhyme Slick. Batman may try to disable Freeze's suit, but he can keep it running with a quick repair skill feat. 7th level sees him gain the chance to take Die Hard, as Freeze has proven more difficult to end than any of Batman's villains, and then he gets his breakthrough modification. Sticking with the armor, I like Dense Plating or Tensile Absorption to protect him against Batman's batarangs or his fists, though I also like Heavy Construction to better represent the encasing nature of his cryosuit. If you're going the weapon innovation route, I think Advanced Rangefinder is probably the best option, in part because there, again, aren't a lot of great options for ranged weapons in the weapon modifications. Paizo, I beg of you, please add more. Anyway, crafting and nature both go up to Master Proficiency. At 8th level, Gadget Specialist will allow Freeze to put together inventions to counter his foes, as seen in his fight in the Arkham City game. The best tool for this is probably the Cryo Mister, so if you want to stick to his theme, just prepare a bunch of these a day. Since there is some focus on medicine in his kit, we'll pick up some of its skill feats, starting with Battle Medicine. There aren't any cold spells to pick up among his 3rd rank spells, so he'll take Elemental Absorption for something. The Tidehardened Ancestry feat at 9th level grants him a bonus on saves against cold effects, which is a good enough reason for me to take it. He will increase his medicine skill to Master, and then obviously choose the Chill Offensive boost to add cold damage to his strikes. This is probably the biggest point of contention I have with this build, because the armor innovation allows you to apply this bonus damage to your unarmed attacks or a single melee weapon. Melee. You might have noticed that I settled on a Bastard Sword for his weapon, based solely on the panel on screen, but going weapon innovation would admittedly solve this issue. With his 10th level class feat, Ubiquitous Gadgets would grant Mr. Freeze more gadgets, but even as I'm putting this video together, I'm kind of falling out of love with this feat. If you're not a fan of it either, Patron's Breath would give him even more cold spells to cast. For his skill feat, Continual Recovery is a fairly core medicine feat that he can pick up here. With his ability boost, he does also increase his intelligence, allowing him to become trained in stealth. Part of Freeze's transformation is an enhanced resistance to diseases and toxins, which this build tries to represent with fast recovery as his general feat at 11th level. Since his favorite skills are already a Master Proficiency, he'll start to increase Intimidation to Expert given his menacing mien. Coming in at 12th level is one of the feats that sparked the idea of doing this build in the first place, Deep Freeze. Honestly, I don't think it's that great of a feat/ability, but it is another nice touch towards his ice gun and one that doesn't require him to cast magic. This is just something he can do regularly. Since he has been investing in strength, we'll take Intimidating Prowess for his skill feat, in part because you don't even see his eyes through those goggles he wears, so Intimidating Glare is out. Lucky level 13 grants Freeze the Summon Water Elemental feat, which I mainly took to exclusively use to summon those water elementals that also have the cold trait, so that he can make the ice golems seen in the featured frame. His skill increase again goes to Intimidation, pumping it up to Master. Finally, Freeze returns to his archetype with Expert Witch Spellcasting, adding tools such as Ice Storm, Wall of Ice, and Mantle of the Frozen Heart to his arsenal of Arctic arcane arts. The last of these is especially fun, having an effect that turns his body so cold that contact with him deals cold damage, much like the chill he carries in his new 52 version. As a confirmed atheist within the comics, I thought this was a fun opportunity to take Godless Healing as a skill feat for a character, because it's not something I've done before. Coming in at 15th level is Prescient Planner for his general feat, allowing him to prepare contingencies for whatever he may face, fitting his intellect and some of the strategies he demonstrates in Arkham City. Crafting and Nature Ascend to Legendary before we look to his revolutionary modification. For an armor innovator, I favor physical protections so that he might better counter Batman's typical strategies. But for a weapon innovator, enhanced damage is a bit boring, but does help mitigate the hurt of having a weapon with the reload trait. Purely for more snow spells to spread around, Mr. Freeze takes Advanced Witchcraft for a greater lesson of snow at 16th level, granting him the Personal Blizzard Hex. He'll also learn Frost Pillar for his spell from Expert Witch Spellcasting to represent him freezing people solid. I am kinda surprised that this spell doesn't have the Incapacitation trait, but I guess the creature within isn't harmed by the ice and is actually kinda protected by it. Still, it can potentially just take a combatant out of the fight, so I'm not sure what the design process was on this. Since Freeze has that legendary crafting, and he certainly appears to be something of a polymath with multiple fields of expertise, we'll take Craft Anything for his skill feat, so he can do exactly that. While I'm in an asking mood, there needs to be more 17th level Ancestry feats in this game, but at least Tidal Shield is kind of fun, and could be envisioned as Freeze throwing up a brief wall of ice to defend himself. He also increases Medicine to Legendary. I figured that with his high intelligence and legendary nature skill, we might as well round out his mystic might with Master Witch Spellcasting, which will net him Frigid Flurry at this level. This is a fun spell, giving you some movement options, dealing damage, and just having an area effect, but it's a little bit too mystic for what Freeze usually does. Additionally, he finally takes Robust Recovery so that he can help others recover from diseases as he longs to do for his wife. His final general feat at 19th level will be Prescient Consumable, building out a Prescient Planner and potentially giving him a spare Lesser Cryomister, if it could ever somehow possibly be helpful at this level. With 3 skills at Legendary, we will go for a 4th by applying this level skill increase to Intimidation. Normally I justify my feat choices for capstone feats, but I don't have to this time because there's only one that Freeze can actually take: Full Automation. It'd still probably be my choice regardless, because I always like having these quickened options, even if the armor only grants extra movement. Now, if you've watched a couple of these videos and remember that I just increased Intimidation to Legendary, you probably know what skill feat I'm taking. If you guessed Terrified Retreat, well, I'm sorry, you're wrong. No prize for you. Try again next time. But if you guessed Scared to Death, there's still no prize for you. But you are right. I love this feat. Oh, and Freeze also gets Polar Ray for his 8th rank spell. Alright, that was a lot to get through. Why don't we all just chill out a little bit and review the build for this Boreal baddie. Mr. Freeze is a Rhyme-Soul human inventor with the armor innovation and academic background. This backstory represents his shunting into a boarding school program by his parents, while his investment in medicine and its skill feat matches his initial interest in preserving and saving lives, and his eventual singular devotion to curing his wife. Given his time working at a drug company, alchemical crafting fits in, though he has demonstrated amazing engineering ability in general, fitting his class and the crafting skill feats that he takes. His Rhyme-Soul lineage is meant to reinforce his transformation into a being meant for the cold, though it doesn't give him a weakness to fire, an option that seems, again, limited to pop-its. This change also made him highly resistant to diseases and toxins, represented through both fast recovery and robust recovery. This build does focus more on representing his iconic cryo suit with a power suit innovation that protects him from the heat with its Phlogisonic Regulator, and from the weapons of his foes with its physical protections. This can leave his ice gun feeling a bit lacking, but he will try to represent that through a collection of ice spells granted by his Witch dedication, including Mantle of the Frozen Heart, Frost Pillar, and Ray of Frost. A nice aspect of this is as a intelligence space class, he has higher DCs than most martial characters would for these. Freeze's cold is so severe that it can even be felt through his weapons, thanks to his chill offensive boost. Learning from each combat, Freeze prepares for future contingencies with an array of gadgets through his Gadget Specialist, Prescient Planner, and Prescient Consumable. Filled with fanatical fury, Freeze fires frigid flurries at foes while fully fortified in his futuristic Frostforged frame. Let me know what you think of this build and what others you might like to see. You can check out the blog for a deeper breakdown of the build, which also includes items and suggestions for a free archetype game. That, along with the Monster Monday Twitter and Discord, are linked in the description below. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and have a fantastic Friday.
Revenge is a dish best served cold.